So welcome, everybody. Today we are here as part of a partnership between the University Archives and RAPS to capture and preserve and share the unique history of our campus here at Portland State. So today we are particularly delighted. We've been wanting to do this for a while, and so we're really happy to have this opportunity to talk with some key people who were involved with what eventually became known as the School of Health and Human Performance here at Portland State. So it is April 12th, 2014, and I thought we'd start by having everybody just go around and introduce themselves, and also maybe your past title or affiliation. So I am Chris Paschild. I'm the University Archivist here at the Portland State University Library.
I'm Chuck Becker. I'm an Emeritus Professor at Portland State in the School of Health and Human Performance, and had served also as a football coach and golf coach.
Mm-hmm. I'm Alice Lehman, and I'm a retiree from the School of Health and Physical Education. My title was Professor of Health and Physical Education, and I was Assistant Dean.
I'm Jack Schendel. I was the Dean of the School of Health and Human Performance at its termination, and also a Professor of Physical Education.
And I'm Maxine Thomas, and I was in the School of Education, and I was, I guess, emeritus when I finally retired. And I taught the methods for health and PE for the undergraduate and the graduate.
I'm Steve Brannon, and I'm chairing the RAPS History Committee, and I'm Emeritus Professor from the Graduate School of Education.
Go ahead.
I'm Caroline Harrison, and I'm a technician in the University Archives.
Yeah. And Maxine and Steve are here to help facilitate the interview, but Maxine's also got a lot of her own perspectives at this time, so she'll be sharing as well. So my understanding is that we, Chuck and Alice and Jack got together and kind of decided to take the lead going chronologically, starting with Vanport, the very beginnings of Portland State. And Chuck was a Vanport student before he became faculty and coach. And so you're going to start us off, and then I think it's we'll just have a conversation going there. So okay. Yeah, maybe start about what brought you first to Vanport and what it was like.
Well, what brought me to Vanport was I had no other choices of where to go to school. I came from a family that had not had people in the educational field or who had gone to college. So I started looking around, and so Vanport, which was at the Oregon shipyards in 1951 when I began my student career. And I thought that, I wanted to play sports, and I wanted to major in health and PE. I knew that I couldn't go to another institution because I didn't have the resources. And so where did I have resources? I was here. And I can remember my first tuition. I think it was $50 a term.
Wow.
And so things have changed quite a bit significantly and have made improvements. But I think that, when I looked at where to go to school, I thought to myself, I have to have something that's convenient, accessible, and that I can afford. And so Vanport became that choice, even though I had looked at other institutions. I knew that I wanted to play football, and so I thought I had a better chance at Vanport than I did at Oregon. And so I chose a Vanport Extension Center. It was a long drive from southeast Portland out to the Oregon shipyards, where they moved after they were flooded out in 1948 by the Vanport flood. And I found that there was times when I could travel with other people and got acquainted with students, and we had a camaraderie among students. That was one of let's help each other. And I think that still prevails at Portland State today.
Can I ask, how old were you when you started classes?
Gosh, how old was I? I think I was 18 when I started. Okay. And so.
And did they have a football team?
We had a football team. Portland State, Vanport had a football team all those years. Actually, Joe Holland, who started with Vanport, was an elementary school teacher and was appointed as athletic director. And there was no physical education or health component, but there were some courses that were offered as activities. But you have to remember that at Vanport, we didn't have a gymnasium. We had an old recreation hall, and where we lifted weights and tried to play basketball in, but you kept running into the wall. It's kind of like when we moved to Lincoln Hall, and we had the three classes going in the old gym. We had a class going around the outside of the gym, then we had a basketball or a volleyball class going on the gym floor, and then under the mezzanine or under the balcony, we had a wrestling class going. And so, it was a great time to be at Portland State because you saw a lot of innovation, you saw a lot of new techniques and management of classes because we had those things to work against.
What year? Oh, excuse me.
That was in 1951. Well, it was in 51, 52, 53, 54 when we moved into Lincoln Hall.
Okay.
And that was when everything was in Lincoln Hall. And eventually, one of the areas, renovation and expansion of the university to East Hall and those areas, and the library moved out to East Hall, and so that gave us the availability on the second floor for the library for a weight room. And so I was one of the people, that did some things.
When you started as a student at Vanport or at the shipyards, comment about the makeup of the student body.
Yeah, this was interesting to me because of the fact that many of the students were older,
Right.
and many of them were veterans, and some had gone into the service, hadn't been in the war, but they came in back from the service, discharged. So the composition of the student body was primarily male,
Right.
with a few women that had great opportunities for selection. And but even those people that were veterans and were the older students, they had an interest in the younger student body. And I would say this, that the ladies were the younger of the group, and there were a few of us that had come from high school, but the majority were older students. And it wasn't until we moved from Vanport, the Oregon ship, to Lincoln Hall that we saw this change take place. But there's always been an older student body at Portland State, and I can remember one of the students that we had was the founder of Rhodes Bread, and he wanted to come back, and he sold his business, a franchise and patent on Rhodes Bread, and came back to Portland State and got a degree in education. And I think he went out to Milwaukee High School as superintendent eventually. So there were a lot of opportunities that Portland State provided during those early years. And even now, the opportunities are even fantastic. Really great.
Okay. Can you share some memories of the faculty and administrators at the time? It was such a small school that did you know them pretty well?
At Oregon Ship, I pretty much knew everyone.
Uh-huh.
I walked into Joe Holland's office because someone said, well, that's where the athletes and the PE people go. Didn't have a PE major, but if you were interested in PE, you could take your first couple of years here, and that's what I did. I took 3 years here at Portland State before I transferred to Oregon. The opportunity was because of the fact that Portland State was ran out of the extension services of the state system of higher education. And so we had professors who came from Oregon and Oregon State to teach classes here. And I took advantage of that. And I took advantage, many of the professors from Oregon State I took health classes from. So eventually my degree was in health and physical education and recreation from Oregon. But my real love was physical education, and that's what I wanted to do.
And so you walked into Joe Holland's office?
So I walked into Joe Holland's office, and I said, here I am, and he says, who are you? And I said, well, I want to major in PE, and he said, well, Chuck, we don't have a PE major here, but we do offer activity classes, and this is an opportunity, and we do offer other courses in science and mathematics, and so I took a heavy load in sciences and math, I liked math. I ended up, my first teaching job was in math. In junior high school coaching, and so they met my immediate needs,
right.
And I knew that eventually. Well,
Question about your degree. It was in
health and physical education.
It was.
At Oregon.
At Oregon.
Yeah, I got a bachelor's of health, physical education, and recreation. I got 3 areas, and then my master's is in health and PE from Oregon. And then when I went to BYU to get my doctorate, it's in educational administration.
Okay.
And did you ever meet Stephen Epler?
I met Stephen Epler. He was a great person. He met everybody as kind of just flat out. I mean, he didn't superimpose himself on anyone. He was a great person to work with, to have a relationship with. I have a letter in my files at home which still says, "Congratulations," you know. And I was vice president student body at one time, and so, you know, and Rex Putnam, you know, another great person. So we had great administrators at the beginning who saw this as an opportunity. Now we talk about the university that would not die, or the college that would not die,
Right.
and this is certainly true. Now we have expanded beyond all realms of realization, and of course we've had some demise of some areas, which is one we're talking about today.
Right.
But I think that people are still interested in health and physical education, their wellness, their fitness, and they pursue opportunities elsewhere because we have developed in our society the importance of maintaining good health and fitness. And so although we don't have a school of health and physical education anymore, preparing teachers for that purpose, I think that we have raised the level of awareness so that people have accepted they have accepted responsibility for themselves and have sought out opportunities that would provide them with a healthy lifestyle.
That's really
Hey,
good.
one question about who did you compete with in football?
We had the Oregon Collegiate Conference. That started, I think, in 1952, and before that we competed against University of Portland had a football team.
Okay, so you competed with U of
So
Portland.
University, Clark College, which is community college, OCE, Oregon College of Education, OTI, and Eastern Oregon, and Southern Oregon, and Pacific, and Linfield. Those were
Okay.
schools that we competed in. But we had the Oregon Collegiate Conference, which were the Oregon schools, the state schools.
Okay.
And when you played in town, where did you play? And where did you practice also?
On any dirt field that was available. when I went to Oregon, to Oregon Ship, you know, and I talked with Dr. Holland, and he said, "We're going to start practice on such and such a day, and you can check out your equipment." And there was an old recreation hall, so we went out to the old recreation hall, and the walls were made of that wood fiber. You would put your fist to it, you know, or if you leaned against it, you might fall through it. But we had a recreation hall, and so he said, "Come on out." And so went out and got my uniform, and then he said, "Everybody outside." So we go outside, and Oregon Ship had a huge parking lot. No problem in finding a parking space. The only problem was finding one next to the doors. You didn't want to walk too far. But we went out there, and the first day of practice, what we did is formed a big line. He says, "Okay, everybody, here's the paper bag. We're going to walk through here. This is a practice field. Practice field. No grass. All dirt." He said, "You'll find glass. I want you to pick a ball of glass." We go through and got to the other end, and he says, "Now let's turn around." He says, "You may have missed some." and so we did. But it was a, you know, I mean, if you weren't tough, you didn't make it. But no, we played at Roosevelt High School.
Uh-huh.
We played one game at Jellwell Stadium.
Oh, wow.
We did that eventually later on, but that was one place in the early days that we played. And we played also at Lincoln High School for football. But that was the thing, is that many of our facilities were off campus.
Right.
Golf courses were off campus, you know. Swimming pools were off campus.
Right.
Dance halls were off campus. And I might mention, though, they had an intramural program.
A what program?
Intramural. And they had football, and they had basketball, and they had volleyball. And so those were the three first sports in the intramural program. And that was Jim Vitti, who was hired in 1949, I think. And he was the intramural person. We didn't have directors or anything. Just, you're in charge of intramurals, you're in charge of this, you know. No titles.
How many faculty?
There was Spencer and Greenslade, I think, and then Arba Agar, and then Sharkey Nelson and
Right.
Joe Holland. And I think that was the extent of the faculty at that time. It was after we moved to the Lincoln Hall that we added additional staff. And so I spent 1 year at Oregon Ship and then 2 years in Lincoln Hall. And when we were in Lincoln Hall, again, our facilities were all over the place, and maybe someone else wants to talk about where the women's program was. But we went down to Dunaway Park, down on the Willamette River,
Right.
for football practice. We
Okay.
used softball fields around the city parks. We had a great relationship with the city of Portland in utilizing activities. When we were at Oregon Ship, we used a lot of facilities out of Roosevelt High School and out at the Roosevelt or St. John's Community Center. And then when we came here, we used the fantastic pool in Shattuck Hall, which was about as big as this room. You know. So, but then the point, I think that I got a good education, because when I went down to Oregon, and I got drafted and I went to Korea, came back, and I was a more serious student. So I went down to Oregon and I looked at all these facilities, you know, fantastic. And then I'm thinking, you know, when I was at Portland State, what we had, and then when I was hired in '59. One of the areas that I had expertise in was swimming, and so I taught swimming in Shattuck Hall. And, you know, and there, all you had to do is have a pole, and that reached across the pool or to the end, and so you could stand there in case someone you were teaching beginning swimming went down, you just stuck the pole to them, hope that they'd grab a hold of it. You know? Because if you dove in to try to help them, you might hit the other end of the pool, or the side of the pool before you got to them. But it was a great challenge, and it provided great opportunities, I think, for innovation by teaching, where it's happening.
Why did you, was that your goal to come back, or was it just serendipitous, or were you happy to come back as faculty?
I was really happy to, you know, when I graduated from Oregon, I went over to Springfield, and I went to Springfield Junior High, and I was teaching math, and I had strong endorsement in math, and so I was coaching basketball and football. And then I came up one day, and I don't remember exactly when it was, but Dr. Holland, I went out to visit because I had a lot of respect for Dr. Holland. And he said, you know, Chuck, he said, I'm going to be adding staff in the next couple of years. And he said, I'd like for you to go back to Oregon and get your master's degree. And so I said, well, let's see, okay, this is 57, so you're going to hire somebody in 58. So they hired Gene McNally in 58 for the health education. And I went back to Oregon, got my master's, and then I came here in 59. And I came here as an assistant football coach with Hugh Smithwick, who was new on the faculty. He was at Oregon working on his doctorate at that time. And so Gene McNally was already here, so Hugh and Gene and I were football coaches. So we practiced down at the Willamette Park, down next to the, we have beautiful, I mean, where else can you go and have a river running by your football practice field? The only thing is you didn't want to jump in the river. Yeah.
Were there women involved yet?
We had women in intramurals programs, but it was a part of the PE program, and it was just they get together, and there was a faculty member that was not assigned, but one who was given some release time to do the women's intramurals. And Alice can probably speak more to that than I can, but there was a great development program, and there was always opportunity for women. The men's program is more my area that I have exposure to and participation in.
Before we move on, and Alice probably can, well, actually all three of you probably contribute to this too. I would just love to learn a little bit more about Joe Holland as a person, because he comes up so much in the archives. I mean, he's such a figure for Portland State.
Well, he is. Dr. Holland was graduated from Willamette University, and I believe he got both his bachelor's and master's from the University of Willamette, excuse me. And then he was working on his doctorate and got his doctorate in, I think, 1950 from the University of Oregon. And at that time, there was no Department of Physical Education. It was Department of Athletics, and assuming that you'd also teach activities associated with athletics. And so to me, I have a lot of respect for Joe, because he put a lot of time and effort, and all of the early developments that took place were his initiatives. The building the HPE was under his direction, and so I think he contributed a great deal to this university.
That's great.
And he was a professional football player.
I didn't know that.
Professional.
I didn't know that.
What's that mean?
What does that mean?
Who did he play for?
Yeah.
You know, I asked him one time, and I never got an answer from him. But he played football at Willamette, and he played 2 years of professional football.
Oh, interesting.
And then in '46 he came to Vanport.
Right.
And you know, that was the time you either break with it and still have your legs and your mind and whatnot. But anyway, he had an interesting life, and you know, I'm thankful for it because I think he gave me an opportunity, and I owe him a lot.
Oh, wonderful.
Did you teach with him, Alice?
Did I teach with him?
Joe, yeah, I mean, what do you know
He
about him?
hired me, yes, and I was with him from when I came in 1959 up until the time we opened the School of Health and PE, the new building, and Lee Ragsdale took over then, and that would have been 1967, I believe. No, 1969, 7.
No. Jack knows.
I think that we had in 66, in 65, 66 is when we moved into the building. And I think that's when we had the transition. And I think that Lee Ragsdale was hired
Yeah.
then.
As the
Yeah.
dean.
Well,
Or-
we,
Department head
Well,
would have been?
Department, you
head.
didn't have a dean,
Yes.
right, department head.
yeah. Remember that we didn't have a real high echelon, you know, when we had women's PE and men's PE, it was just that we had classes for men and we had classes for women. And oh, by the way, we got some co-ed classes. And I can remember because I taught a gymnastics co-ed class. And I taught a weightlifting class, a co-ed class, which was very interesting.
When I'll start adding some things to
Yeah,
what Chuck
please
said.
do.
When I came to Portland State in 1959, Joe Holland was the head of the Health and PE section, but we were a subdivision of the School of Education.
Okay.
So all of our work and our recommendations for promotion and all those kinds of things went through the School of Education. So we were up against all of the professors with the PhDs and the research and teaching maybe 3 classes a term and doing research, and we were teaching 8 and 9 classes a term. And so we were in difficult times then as far as getting promoted or doing other things. And so with the Scott report, and I'll let these 2 gentlemen talk more about that because I'm not real familiar with it. They recommended that athletics be separated from health and physical education.
Okay.
And as a result of that, that also helped us get divorced from the School of Education.
Mhm.
And that's when we really started to take off with and building, the construction of the new building and new people, and we were able to do our own thing rather than being responsible to the School of Education is when we really started to progress in what we were able to do. While we're on the subject of being part of the School of Education, I'll add to this by telling you some of the facilities I had for an office. My first office was in the School of Education main office, and there were little cubby holes around the side of that. And another woman PE teacher and I shared one cubby hole that was big enough to put in 2 desks back to back and 2 bookcases that were sitting on top of the desk and leaning against the wall because there wasn't room anywhere on the floor for them. From that point, then, I moved to an office that they had built in the women's locker room. And it was a partition with 2 offices, and being in the women's locker room was being like in a zoo 24 hours a day because they were all of the students that were taking PE classes were running in and out, and some of them would lounge around down there and visit, and so we were in constant noise down there. If you really wanted to do anything with concentration, you had to go someplace else. My next office was in the hall of Lincoln Hall on the lower level, and it sort of, the back of it abutted the center, what should I call it?
It put it up
center,
against the
the
gymnasium.
ventilation, well, the whole
Ventilation,
ventilation system that went up to the top of the building.
There's a staff
And
center, I think, all back in the
yeah. So that's where the back of my office was, and there was a window into that hole back there. And I remember putting curtains over the window so I didn't have to look out there. But it was interesting being down there because the physics department was down there, and I used to see Gertrude Remfer walk back and forth, and if you know about her and all her wonderful research. So there were other people down there, not just health and PE people. After we moved into the new building, our offices were luxurious. They weren't big, but they were luxurious compared to what we had. But
Can
those
I
were some
can I add
memories.
something to that?
Yeah.
Alice? You know, that's one of the things is that, you know, we adapted to what we had for offices. And my first year back in '59, my office was in the balcony with Ralph Davis and Mike Tishy. I was in the balcony of the gymnasium where you had 3 classes going down below. So there was no privacy. There wasn't any
Did you have a door?
quietness. Yeah, we had a door, but you know, they were partitions and they were open up above.
Right.
So you had all this noise coming in. And so the opportunity came for Hugh Smithwick and Gene McNally and I to move to another location. So we jumped at it. So the 3 of us were in another office about as big as this room. You know, and we were spacious at that time.
Alice, I've heard stories, all this, excuse me, occurred before I came here. I've heard stories about the gymnasium facilities that you acquired or you had access to off campus. And why don't you talk a little bit about that?
I'd love to talk about that. The main Lincoln Gymnasium was primarily for men to use, and then they had their own locker room. And the other thing I should have told you about the locker room is that all the women's clothes that were worn to activity classes were issued. They go to the window and get a pair of shorts and a shirt. And in those days, they were white cotton. So they had to be laundered, and Chuck tells me the laundry was in the men's locker room. I didn't see that. And then they would come back to the women's locker room, and the shirts had to be ironed. And if you know what cotton is like to iron, it's awful. But these gals on work study would be down there in the locker room, and the ironing boards would be all set up, and they'd be ironing the shirts for the gals to wear in PE class. And then our main facility for women's activities, although we did co-ed things down there, was what we called the synagogue gym. It's technically was called, I believe, the women's gym, but its nickname was the synagogue gym. It was originally a synagogue and stood at the corner of the Park Blocks and Market. No. Clay.
Okay.
I think you.
Right now, I went by there a few weeks ago so I would know what it looked like. There's a Starbucks and an apartment house there on that corner. So we would leave the Lincoln Hall, run a block down to the synagogue gym, and whether it was snowing or raining or whatever, we always had to run down that block. Another block down is the First Christian Church, and there's a door on the side of that, and we used that for modern dance because the synagogue gym was so bad. There were nails coming out of the floor, and it was so narrow. I estimate that the whole size of that was the size of a volleyball court. So when we played things like volleyball, they had to be crosswise because you couldn't just have one court lengthwise for a whole class. So we played crosswise, and they put tape on the wall, and if the ball hit above the tape, it was out of bounds, and if it hit below the tape, it was in bounds. But I taught golf there, I taught volleyball there, I taught all kinds of dance classes there, except for modern dance because you couldn't use the floor, and that's why we always went down to the First Christian Church there.
What years were these now?
This was, well, we used that synagogue gym clear up until the time we moved in the building in '69, I believe it was. So,
Alice, can we just back up a little bit to you coming to Portland State? So where were you before and what brought you here?
I was in Salem teaching at South Salem High School, and one of the most lovely schools. It had just been opened, and we had it was just a show place for the whole state. And one day I got a call from the director of health and PE for the state of Oregon, and he said, how would you like to go up to Portland State to teach? And I had always wanted to teach in college. That was in the back of my mind. And I think he did that. South Salem had won an award for their PE program by the Oregon Association. And they had spent time in our building and watched our program. So I found out later he told Joe Holland about me. Oh. So Joe Holland called and said, was I interested? And I said, well, I don't know. And so I came up and interviewed for the job. And like I say, I really wanted to move up, and I thought, well, I'm not going to move up at the University of Oregon or any place like that. I got to start in the bottom. So I came up and interviewed, and I was a little appalled at the facility, but I decided it was a move for me. And after I got here, I never wanted to leave.
Why is that? Oh, I'm sorry.
Why didn't I?
Why did you? Even though the facilities were what they were when you were starting. Well,
we saw something at the end of the road when we knew we were going to get the new facilities. We got some major programs, and we were able to offer degrees in health and physical education, and I was able to move up in what I was doing, and so it made it very nice to just stay and see the place grow and do good things.
You know who the person was in the State Department?
He was the director of health and PE, assistant superintendent for health and physical education, and I don't remember what his name was.
But he was in the State Department.
Yes, he was in the State Department.
Okay. And what about Evelyn Victors? Is she later?
Evelyn was here before all of us.
Right.
And she taught with the General Extension Division and traveled the state. Taught some professional classes like folk square and social dance and elementary PE, and so she was a GED person really originally. And then as Portland State advanced, she started to be part of the School of Health and, at that time, Department of Health and Physical Education.
Yeah, I remember Evelyn Victors quite well. I came as an undergraduate student in 1952 here, and I took her dancing down at the synagogue.
Oh, did you? Good. I'm glad you experienced that.
She's a very strong person, and I'm a short guy, and I remember her lifting me off the ground a number of times. And I also did a little wrestling for Howard Westcott.
Oh, did you?
And we did have the mat underneath the
balcony.
Yeah, the balcony there in the old building, and so I had some fun experiences in those early days. And I might have taken a class from you, but when did you come again?
59.
59.
Oh no, I was
later,
already
yeah.
through. I graduated in 57.
Yeah, those were interesting days. Because it provided an opportunity and a challenge. And I think we're of the nature that we like opportunities and we like challenges. And we saw this opportunity for ourselves to grow and to provide something to other people, just basically students. And the other thing is there was a camaraderie among the staff. We helped each other, and that was really helpful because you knew you could depend on the rest of the staff for support.
I think what I've been hearing, and I've heard some of these, and a lot of these reports or stories before, expresses the fact that there was a vision here that people caught.
Right.
And they could see the potential down the road. Couldn't happen today or this year or even next, but if we hang on and keep working at it and work together, we'll see that vision realized. And then the vision kept being extended so that when I came here that I could pick up on that.
And I think that's really true, Jack, because we started out, there was no PE program as such. There were activities, and you enrolled in the activities, and if you were going to transfer someplace else, those transferred because it required, activity classes. But the thing is that, even I think I took my introduction to health and PE class from Joe Holland after we had moved to the Lincoln Hall. But we were considered an extension of the state system of higher education. We weren't considered an institution in of ourselves until 1955. Then we became Portland State, College, and then we were granted opportunities to provide degrees. And we didn't get our degree until I think it was 57, Alice, that we could.
What really happened in the 50s is that the people who went through the PE program, and they had to take some of the night extension courses because we didn't offer them, and they had to graduate. They got their degree in education with a sub-major in physical education and health, and were able to be certified as teachers in the state of Oregon. So we graduated quite a few people in the late 50s and early 60s that didn't have the exact degree in health and physical education, but they really were majors. And
yeah, they
their
made
degree
state
was
certification requirements from the state because, as I was saying, that Portland State offered courses really through the Extension Center before we offered them through Portland State. And therefore, they were identified and credited in the state system. So as you transferred other institutions, they were accepted in full. And that's why I was able to stay here 3 years as a student, because I had taken all these extension courses from the University of Oregon professors and Oregon State professors that had come up through the Extension Center to provide those courses.
Well, in 1955, when we became a college, Willard Spalding became Dean of Education. Do you have some memories about working under him, either of you?
Well, he came from Portland Public Schools, if I remember.
He was a superintendent.
And I think that he had a vision for the School of Education. And I'm not negative or anything, but I don't think he had a vision for what health and physical education could become. And I think that vision came from the staff itself. I mean, it was driven by the staff. We saw the need because we had people who were teaching in the schools in Portland, and they were saying, we need more teachers who are qualified PE teachers. Why don't, we have a program here. And if you look at our graduates, more of our graduates were employed in the vicinity of the metropolitan area than going out elsewhere.
And became very notable teachers,
Right.
I might add. We've had quite a few people who have won awards in their teaching, and it's been very gratifying.
Can we talk a little bit? So a big step in the development was getting the building.
Mm-hmm.
Did you all? Do you want to talk a little bit about how that came about, and did you get any input into the design of the building, or how that building would be, the facilities and things? Or?
It was the money for it was part of a bond measure, but for the state. And so when that bond measure came up for election statewide, it involved more than just the health and PE building, but that was the big thing for us. And so when the election came, we just held our breaths because we knew we would or we wouldn't have what we dreamed of having. And so the measure passed, and right away there was a lot of work done on it. And I should add, the faculty had quite a bit of input on that building. The architects obviously did the areas, but within the areas, like there was what we called a range room, and we were able to decide whether we were going to put netting in there and how it was it going to be put so we could practice golf down there, we could practice batting practice down there, and that was a real incentive for all of us to just really work hard to get that building built and have the right to live in it after what we put up with.
I think we all had grandiose ideas of, boy, we're going to have a range room, we're going to have this, we're going to have all these rooms. And you come down to the actual fact, and you've got to share these facilities. So how do you make these multi-purpose facilities?
Right.
And how do you design them in the size so that they're compatible with all these different activities?
But we had racquetball courts, we had a gymnastics room, we had a weight training room, we had a big gym that had a dividing door so you could have 2 sections of classes in there. We had a small gym downstairs, had 2 classrooms for lectures, and
We had a swimming pool, too.
we were living high. In fact, it was the best facility in the state at that time.
Yeah.
Wow.
By
And
far.
I think with that facility, it also provided us an opportunity to begin to specialize. And Garth Zinka was hired as a specialist in the aquatics area. And so with those facilities, we saw opportunities to become more specialized.
You also had a dance studio. It was
Yes, we had
dedicated to
A dance floor, regular,
dedicated
yeah.
dance studio, yes. And we had a dance specialist then. I moved out of that area when we moved in.
When we had all these nice facilities, we did other things.
Well, you had folk dance. You taught. What did you teach?
I taught folk, modern, ballroom. I guess that's it.
I think when we got that room, though, we had ballet, didn't we? Nancy.
Yes, the
So
added
we
ballet.
expanded
But
the dance area, but it wasn't really.
that was pretty much a class taught by somebody outside.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Nancy Matchek, who was our dance director after we had these facilities, was very good in modern and but ballet not. So
This is one of the areas probably that moved from the School of Health and PE was dance, and then moved over into the School of Arts.
yeah.
Okay, I was wondering
The
about
other
that, yeah.
facility I haven't mentioned is Shattuck Hall. When Portland State took over Shattuck Hall, the last thing that was in there was PCC. And so when they moved out, Portland State took over that area and used the classrooms, and I think they closed up the pool. The last I remember is that the pool area was used for
Library.
Archive materials.
library.
It was stored in
Are you still
the
using
pool.
that?
But what was the auditorium? As you look at the building, there are steps up, and the auditorium in this big, large room would have been right there. We used that for a dance area.
There was
so
a small
I took-
gymnasium in that building, too. It was
Oh,
on corner of
the
Broadway.
gymnasium was on the lower level,
lower
yeah.
level,
I
yeah.
had classes down there, and I also I taught professional classes in Folk and Square in the regular gym,
Mhm.
which was downstairs, and we had to move out of that because the big computer moved in there. But on the upper level, the area that had been an auditorium, we had dance classes there, and there was a stage at the end. But even that one had a tile floor, and the tiles would come up and break off, and we had to be careful how we walked around up there. So Portland State used Shattuck quite a bit after PCC moved out of there.
Now, this is kind of a different subject, but who taught the methods? Did Evelyn Victors always teach the methods, or did somebody in health and PE?
You mean in dance?
No, in elementary or secondary?
Oh, elementary.
If I remember
someone-
correctly, I think Joe taught methods class, and he taught several other classes.
I think,
Each-
But
I might just throw this in, Charlotte. It seems to me when I came here, Mike Tishy was involved with methods as well.
yes, elementary
Oh, elementary
Health.
and health, yeah.
and health methods. And somewhere, I think Evelyn Vickers must have taught it, because when I took her place, I started teaching the methods for secondary and elementary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that was true, because when we were with the school or with the Division of Education, that they pretty much had the methods and technology classes there.
Yes,
and
I
I think
remember
that
taking a methods class from Howard Westcott.
Oh, really? What kind of method?
He would come in, plant his methods of health in the health area, I believe. He would come in, plant his feet right on the desk, and proceed to tell us about his years at Reed College. Never really got to much of a lecture about the content of the course, but he was very, very entertaining.
He was
After we, excuse me.
Well, he was a wrestling coach, wasn't he?
yes,
Right.
Yeah.
and he was a good wrestling coach. And,
Yep.
and we, Steve, I also did wrestling with Howard, and Lee Allen, who was Olympic champion, is the guy that I always had to wrestle. And I didn't wrestle very long with him because I was looking at the ceiling before too long.
Howard, he was the throwback to the old faculty that we had, and he was a character.
He was a character.
But the actual health and PE methods, I'm trying to think who did teach that after we moved into the new building. But I think just like you taught it for elementary people, I think somebody taught it for the secondary people too. My mind. Jack? Do you remember when you were there? Who taught the?
Well, I was thinking that Mike taught both the health methods and the
PE.
special PE methods
Oh, did he?
together.
Okay.
I mean, he taught both of those, is my recollection. And that
then,
was true when I came here.
Uh-huh.
because I taught the undergraduate methods and then also the advanced methods for the masters.
Now, am I correct that when you moved into the new building, you went in as a department at that point? Was the Department of Health and Physical Education?
Well, I think that was when we were designated the separation between that year before 65, when the Scott study was undertaken, and that was the suggestion from the Scott study, is that we separate physical education and athletics into two departments.
And
So I'm thinking that what it was the School of Health and Physical Education, or Department of Health and Physical Education, when we moved into that building.
And that's when
They
Lee
were-
Ragson came?
No,
Yes,
well,
yes.
yeah, Joe was still head of PE, and Skip Staley, Hugh Smithwick was interim athletic director. Once they decided to split the two, they split him immediately, and Hugh was football coach, then became the interim athletic director. And then the study was implemented, and then it was put out for a bid for search for athletic director, and that's when Skip Staley came from Idaho.
Can you talk a little more about the report? Why did that report come about? And then
Well,
this was-
I think Alice kind of hit it on the head, is that the PE people, health and PE people, were kind of upset because we were doing a lot of things, and we were taking leadership roles in the state, and we weren't getting recognized for it with compensation or with rank. And I think that was one of the things that we said, this is unfair. We need to study this. We need to have some recommendations on how to resolve this. And that's what the Scott study did.
And so was it an outside consultant that came in
Outside
to do-
consultant.
Yeah, I think Scott came from Columbia University.
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised that Howard Westcott had some influence in that, because that's where Howard did his doctoral work.
Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, they brought Scott in, and there was this study, this investigation. Out of that came the recommendation to separate athletics from health and PE. And out of that came the decision to create this Department of Health and Physical Education when athletics was separated. By the way, that sounds like kind of a cut and dried deal,
Right.
but that's an emotional thing, historically, to separate athletics from
PE.
physical education.
Right.
It was an emotional issue on a lot of campuses because philosophically, at that time, athletics was simply seen as a higher level of physical education. There was a progression philosophically through that. When athletics began to specialize in very specific ways, and coaches were more and more drawn into full-time coaching rather than a split with teaching, it just didn't work anymore. It was the tail wagging the dog so far as people in physical education were concerned. So when that decision was made, it really set in motion a lot of things that were important to the school eventually, and no doubt important to athletics as well, because it put them on a different course. They didn't have to deal with these split contracts where they were obligated to teach so many classes a term, and then the balance of their assignment was in athletics. Now they were able to move away from that. Even after that, however, there were, in many cases, there were coaches who had a small fraction of their total load was devoted to some kind of teaching, because this institution simply couldn't afford full-time coaches of every sort unilaterally working in athletics. They just couldn't afford it financially. So there had to be this kind of a split.
To give you an illustration, that myself, I was hired as a PE instructor and as assistant football coach. And that's what my contract said. And that's all it said.
Oh.
But what actually happened is that I got released from one teaching class during football season. And it just doesn't sound right. Not when you're spending, 3-4 hours a day and plus your weekends. Like I did most of the scouting, so I was gone on weekends. And so I was getting released for 3 hours, for 15 hours. Pretty good deal for athletics, But I think that we accepted that as a part of our responsibility, as part of our job description. And I don't think there was too much concern about it, but because we all liked athletics and had been involved in athletics, we saw the relationship between the two. And
So since you had that active relationship as a coach too, how did that split feel for you when that happened?
I had to consider that, and I was contemplating at that time, and I was already taking courses, graduate courses, working beyond a master's degree, and so I said that I was really wanting to get my doctorate. So I made the decision at that time in '66 to give up coaching and became full-time PE. There were a lot of things that happened in that time. We had an intramural program. Women had the women's program for athletics, and they were kind of on a, you're going to be doing this and you're going to be doing that. Not titles or anything else, because we weren't interested in titles. We were interested in doing a service, and this is what happened. And so, eventually, as I said, Jim Vicky at Vanport was the intramural program director because he had intramurals. So we had intramurals at Portland State from the very beginning, and we talk about intramurals being a part of PE and athletics being part of PE, and as those things came about, they became more separate. And we had sports clubs also at Portland State, and so I had a part-time appointment for 2 years, and intramural, my FTE for intramurals and club sports advisor came out of the student affairs office, and then those divisions began separate, and so then when Gene McNally was the first official director of intramurals, and then when Gene passed on, then I accepted that responsibility and became director of intramurals. So we've had a lot of things happen, and not intentionally, but by circumstances.
And where was that all when you took over? Where were
I came in 1978.
Okay.
So this building had been in operation since Lee Ragsdale came in 66, I think.
And what did he come? What was his job again?
Lee, he was a department head.
That he became dean.
And that's when we became a separate department from the School
Okay.
of Education.
And so he came in from he was outside hire?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, where did he come from?
He was the
Medford.
director of health and PE for Medford.
Okay.
Public schools,
He had also just finished his doctorate at Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just moved to Oregon, so Lee Ragsdale was my supervisor in Medford.
Oh,
Well, anyway, all of these pieces that have been described here began to fall in place. Not in a way that anybody could have forecast, but piece by piece they started to take shape. And then when the building was constructed and they separated athletics from HPE, then it really gave it form and substance in a way that had never existed before. And so when I came in '78, let me back up just a minute because I'd like to tell you why I came here. I was at the University of Toledo in Ohio. Before that, I was at the University of Oregon. And University of Toledo was an urban-based university, but it didn't look much like an urban-based university. It was kind of the town and gown sort of estrangement, if you will. So when the opportunity came to look at this position here, when Lee was going to retire, I came at a certain point, came for an interview, and I liked what I was hearing, not only from the faculty, but also from the central administration. And the person that was key in that was Leon Rochelle.
Oh, yeah.
And not Lafile. It was a basketball coach and many years before in my life. But Leon Rochelle was really a remarkable person. And I was so impressed with him and his expressed vision for the university that really kind of tipped the scales for me. I didn't need to leave Toledo. I was an administrator there, also a split administrative and faculty appointment. But this was really an attractive opportunity to me for the reason that I perceived that this institution was really serious about becoming an urban, about being, not becoming, but about being an urban-related university integrated with the city and the metropolitan area. That was attractive to me. So I came in '78. Things were pretty well established by then. Lee had been here for 11 years, I think, from 66 to 70, all of 66. That would have been 66, 67, and retired in '78, spring.
Can we talk, what are some of the key developments that happened once he came in during that period leading up to when Jack came in? I mean, that 12 years. What do you all remember as some of the things that really took off during that time or came together?
Well, go ahead, Chuck.
During Lee Ragsdale's time. Well, I think what happened is at that time we saw a more specific role and became more identified as a valid part of the university. We weren't just a segment. We became a vital part, just like any other division within the university, and began recognized. And I believe that Lee at that time was also a part of the higher echelon circle, you might say. So, and I think when you came and we became a school, then you got the title of dean, and then you were part of the academic advisors and the academic team. But I think there was an informal, a lot of things were informal. I think the vision was there, but there wasn't the implementation of that vision in its totality. It couldn't possibly happen that way. So it happened in parts, little part here, little part there.
When we split from the School of Education and went to the new Health and PE building, and Lee Ragsdale came here, he was the department head. They couldn't give him the title of dean because we were not a school. But we were a freestanding department, and Lee Ragsdale was considered a dean, except his title was department head. Right. He belonged to the Council of Deans and participated in all of the decisions of the university that the deans did. We enlarged our major program because we had the facilities, and so we hired a lot of specialists in physiology of exercise, kinesiology, measurement and evaluation, and the hardcore theory courses. And as a result of that, they wanted to do more than just teach teacher ed things. They wanted to do more scientific oriented research and have students of that caliber. So sometime in the early 70s, we had a retreat called the Canita retreat, and we went for the weekend up at Canita and discussed curriculum things. And so there were a lot of ideas thrown out, and people went around and around on what we ought to do. And with much follow-up, we developed options within our major. So we had a teacher education option in physical education. Then we added one that was called urban community physical education to adapt to the people and recreation in this area. And another one called research. And that was the scientific area so that people could go on and work on their master's and doctoral degrees in that field. And then the health split into a teacher education option and a community health option.
Okay.
So then we had essentially after that time 5 degree programs that students could go through rather than just teacher ed, teacher ed, teacher ed.
Right. And did you see the demand and the interest from the students?
Oh my, yes. When I left, and that was only the year before they closed the school, we had at least 250 majors in our program. So they were dropped just like that.
And they weren't all teacher oriented. Those were people that wanted to work in the fitness area. Right. Those who wanted to work in the urban community physical education, which was kind of the area that I supervised.
Right.
Let me throw in a little thing here that's always interested me, and I learned how to live with it. When the urban physical education major or concentration or specialization was adopted, it was given that title because in the state system at that time there was a tight control over which campuses were authorized to offer which career programs. So Oregon had a lock on recreation.
Yeah.
So urban PE was adopted to accommodate people who wanted to pursue careers in recreation, various kinds of civic and municipal organizations and so forth. And they did that just to escape the hammer of the state system coming down saying you can't do that because that's not part of your mission. So it was interesting when I came here to learn those things, and I quickly learned that there are some things that you have to work around because if you try to address them head on, you immediately get this wall of resistance.
Jack was a quick learner. This was something we had fought from the very beginning, I think, Alice, is that, how do we become identified as a viable part of the university and its offerings? And so we not only within the university, but also from the Oregon and Oregon State, because they were the institutions, had been always the institutions, And so you had to fight that as well. And so I think what we found that there were people that had been students at Portland State, well, and who had gone on in the state system, like Bill Lehman, for instance, who went on to be vice chancellor. He was our business manager at Vanport, and here at Portland State. And so we had some of those people in key places that said, no, wait a while, Oregon State. There are opportunities for you as well as Portland State. So, the ball game became more organized, let's say.
So we're back from our break, and before we move kind of into the next era and talk about everything that happened when Jack got here, we were going to talk specifically a little more about development of women's athletics and programs here with Alice.
Obviously, they were not very big, and mostly the faculty who participated in those things, as coaches, were not paid or given any release time for doing it. They did it above and beyond their regular teaching schedule. And there were weekends, Saturdays, they might have a field hockey tournament, and 4 or 5 schools would show up and they'd play. But it was more like what we called in high school play days, where there was no real there was an incentive to win, but there wasn't anything you were going to win at the end, whether you won or not. So, and the coaches were just faculty members who donated their time. Like Linda Nicholson was with field hockey, and she'd take the field hockey team around and they'd play, and somebody else would take the basketball team. And I was lucky, I coached the bowling team, both men's and women's, and the student union sponsored them, and we were part of NAIA, and we even got to go back to national tournament in Kansas City because there was money there, which there wasn't for the women's. And eventually, as sports became more important, and it was important for the women to have these experiences when they went out to teach, there was release time given. Like Chuck said, he was released one class for coaching football, and so the women would do that. But Title IX was the real change in women's athletics when they had to have equal access. So at that time, the faculty started getting release time. We really didn't hire a lot of outside people to coach like the men did, but there were some outside coaches hired. And
would that be Marlene in volleyball?
Marlene was actually part of the faculty at that time.
Oh, okay.
So, and probably one of our more well-known coaches was Sharky Nelson, who coached the men's basketball team, and then he went on to other things in the employment division, and then he came back and coached the women's basketball team.
I didn't know that.
And they won quite a few games and were very good, and one of these star players was Terry Mariani, if you know her. The ex-coach of the men's team, Marion Parison, you may recognize that name, he quit as basketball coach and went into private business with a motel chain. And so as women's sports became more important, he said, women need to have more exposure to outside the state. And so he helped us organize the Giusti tournament. I don't know whether you've heard of that or not. It was a basketball tournament in the Coliseum, sponsored by companies, and we had the top teams in the nation, and that was the first basketball tournament nationwide, I believe, that was ever held. Wow. It was a wonderful event.
Was that from the Giusti Wine Company?
Yes.
Yes.
The Giusti Wine Company put in a lot of money for it. And then the hotel chain put in quite a bit of money for it. So when you should talk with Terry Mariani about the development of athletics, both men's and women's, because she's the prime person that would know everything for athletics from beginning to end. And she can tell you all about that. But we were all very involved in that. And now that I think about it, I think even before that tournament, we hosted, and Marlene Piper was very into this. She was a wonderful volleyball coach, and we won lots of volleyball tournaments. We hosted probably the first volleyball tournament in our gym, and we had Hawaii, and I can't remember all the Hawaii. I remember because they brought pineapples, and quite a few large schools.
What year would that be? Do you recall?
Pardon me?
What year was that?
I don't remember exactly. Now, Oma Blankenship, I think, was sort of head of athletics then, so we'd have to go back and find out when she was doing that. But it was a wonderful tournament. And
was this, Alice, was this under NAIA?
It might have been. I just don't remember for sure, but I remember how hard we worked on it because it was the women faculty who put this thing on. We did have help from outside, but it was a giant thing.
Well, the NAIA thing was the first national organization for women's athletics, and then it morphed its way into an NCAA division. And I think that first tournament I was told was
I'm sure you're
NAIA.
right, Jack. I'm sure you're right.
Anyway, go ahead.
Well, I really don't. Eventually, people got released time to do some coaching, but and Jack, you'll have to. Well, we really never had any full-time coaches, even when you were there, did we? Like the football coach
I
didn't
think
teach
Reed was
any.
the full-time.
Pardon me?
Reed was full-time coach.
Who?
Reed, Don Reed.
But
No,
not
I
in
mean
women.
women. Women. I don't think we
I
ever
think
had a
no.
full-time coach.
I think even someone like Jeff Mazzocchi, I think was maybe taught one class or something, but it was probably related to his coaching field.
Yeah.
Probably related to volleyball. There were some of those people who taught for us, but they only taught one course, and that was because we needed that access for our students to have that kind of expertise, connection.
Right.
So that's my recollection. I don't know if anybody was full-time without any strings to our program.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand. So, when that break comes between the department and athletics, the women faculty still actually keep a close relationship with women's athletics at that point. It's a little different than, say, men's football. Am I understanding that correctly? Where it sounds like men's football became more of its own, it went with athletics and there was a full-time coach.
We didn't have any full-time coaches.
Yeah, so it's a different,
Yeah.
it had a different effect. Or it didn't, you still stayed involved even though athletics.
I think
technically
the
didn't
women
have-
were still hired as PE teachers, but they had interest and expertise in coaching a particular sport, and that's
That-
it.
I'm
was-
I'm
Piper-
sure that changed after I left, and Jack can
Well,
vouch for
it
that.
changed some before you left.
Yeah.
Okay.
When I came here, it seems to me, and I didn't check this out, but it seems to me that PSU was already connected with NAIA when the National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women, NAIAW. I think they were already connected with that, and that tournament you referred to, Alice, seems to me that it happened in the first year or two after I came here, late 70s probably.
Okay.
And from that point forward, people were identified as having their primary responsibility in athletics.
Okay.
That would have been true of the volleyball coach, the basketball coach, and the softball coach.
Okay.
Other women's sports, I think that was not so much the case. As I recall, for quite a while, the women's track coach, as was true for the men's track coach, was an individual brought in by the athletic department, had no connection to our school. They were part-time,
Okay.
at least when they started in those roles. So it's like everything else. It's kind of a stair step of change as this time went by, and gradually as the demands became greater and the interest became greater, things moved from volunteer to a limited amount of workload credit to a major portion, or to being the primary source of their employment.
Right.
And in those cases, we didn't really have a whole lot to say about who was hired. Usually what happened, they knew they wanted to finally work down who they wanted to hire as the women's volleyball coach, let's say. And I would be informed that this is what they wanted to do, and when they needed them to teach one course or something as a part of their appointment. But from that point forward, we had very little control. Same thing was true with the athletic trainer. We had an athletic training, a minor program that led to a certification, nationally certified as an athletic trainer. And while that person was key to us in terms of developing the coursework to support that program, the reality was that he was more in athletics than there was in
Right.
PE. So when it came time to change trainers, they had one incident during my 11 years, my 14 years, excuse me, where the athletic department decided the athletic trainer needed to go. They needed to change.
Oh.
So that decision was made, and then we were informed. But that was because they were primarily supported by the athletic department budget. The same would have been true in reverse. If we had a person who was teaching for us 3/4 time and 1/4 time in athletics, it became to the point where we thought that person wasn't surviving in that role, the role for us, then we would have had the primary responsibility for making that decision. I'd like to go back to, unless you want to go on with the athletics.
No, I think what the committee needs to do now, your library committee and research, need to talk to somebody from women's athletics.
Yeah,
I think
that would be wonderful.
That would be a very good thing to do.
Well, you know, we're about to get about 2,000, I think, photos from athletics online within the next couple months. And so we're really looking at that as an opportunity to start talking.
Yeah.
Probably will bug some of you again and some other people too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jack, you're on.
Well,
Oh, good. Well, maybe before we move to Jack, Maxine, did you want to talk? You know, we've talked some about this separation of the department, which becomes a school, from athletics, but also the kind of the break with education. You were in education, but you still had a relationship with the.
Yes, I taught health and PE
Right.
in the public schools,
Right.
and Evelyn Victors happened to come see one of my elementary PE classes, and she was working on her doctorate. And so she said, "How would you like to come to Portland State for a year while she finished her doctorate?"
Oh.
So I ended up coming to the School of Education and staying 25 years. But so I taught the elementary PE methods for elementary teachers.
Oh, so and what year did you start again? Here.
66,
Okay,
67.
okay.
I'm not looking at
67.
Yeah.
67.
Okay.
So I taught, and then I taught the secondary methods, and then when they got their masters, I taught the advanced methods in health and advanced methods in PE. So maybe I kind of took over for what Mike used to do, what Evelyn did. So
But that was under the School of Ed at that
that was
point.
in the School of Ed.
Right.
And
Interesting.
if there was a division, I never felt it because I was a PE or a health teacher,
Right.
and so I always felt part of you, and it wasn't like a competition at that time. So does that kind of answer your
Yeah,
question?
no, that's really helpful.
Thank
yeah,
you.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So
I mentioned earlier that one of the things that attracted me to this opportunity was the vision that I sensed people had. The background of that goes all the way back to the beginning, I'm sure, that you've learned by listening to Chuck and Alice. Some of the people who were here when I came had a fairly long history with the place, and some of them were relatively short histories. But there were some developing specializations academically and professionally that depended on the credentials of the people who actually were making those things happen, those developments happen. And there were some really good people, but they had to be special kinds of people. Not everybody who was in a specialization area, and by specialization area I'm referring to body mechanics, kinesiology, exercise physiology, motor development, perceptual motor learning as it applies to the motor development. Not everybody who has a specialization in those areas and has a reputation and recognition in those areas fits in an institution like this. If they want to spend their time as much as they can possibly squeeze in terms of their workload in the laboratory, they wouldn't have fit here. But gradually we were moving in the direction, and did move in the direction, of providing more opportunities as the curriculum expanded And as that led to more involvement in the community, and as that led to more research activity and publication activity by people who had those specializations, the kind of person that we needed or would fit in shifted a little bit, not a lot. We had one case. I won't use his name because it doesn't make any difference, but it illustrates the point. We had a retirement. This was in the mid-'80s, and so we went on a national search, and we wanted to hire a person who would be a second specialist, if you will, in the area of exercise science. And so we ended up hiring a person, a young man who had just finished his PhD, who had all the right credentials, and he was a good man. He understood his field very well, but he never fit here. It was just a bad fit. And he, after 2 years, he came to my office one day, and he said, "I've been invited to interview at a certain university in the Midwest," and he said, "I'm pretty interested." And I said, "You know what?" I said, "I don't think this has been a good fit for you and for us," because he's kind of resistant being integrated into the flow of things. He wanted to do his own thing, at which he was very good. So I told him, I think if this opportunity is presented to you and you think it's an opportunity well suited to you, my advice to you is take it, because I think you'll be happier there than you are here sort of fighting against the realities, and we'll probably be better off because we'll find a person who fits our situation better.
So what were some of those realities? I mean, when you say that, what do you mean specifically? What did someone need to feel successful in this situation?
We were an emerging institution in terms of these specializations.
Right.
We simply could not provide him with the specialized narrow focus in his work, not only in his research, not so much, but in his teaching. He didn't want to be involved in teaching other things that were important to us to have taught, and he had the credentials and the expertise to do that, but he just wasn't interested in that, and he found a variety of ways to resist doing that. So that's why I said he didn't fit. Maybe now, well, not now, but at another time, he might have fit into the situation much better as those specializations develop.
And I might say that's not unique to your field.
That's probably true.
That happens across the university and other academic fields.
And I think that's one of the significant or primary roles of an administrator, is to to put the faculty in a position to do the search, to be involved in the search, and to make the judgments about which candidates to recommend based on the way they fit. And really, you need a cross-section of opinions to do that. One administrator can't do that alone. And so when he left, we hired another young man, and he is still here, and he's a good fit. He's a good fit for this situation. So that kind of thing was going on, but I guess that started from my comment about the gradually increasing specialization areas. And even that lended itself to someone like Chuck, who'd been here a long time, as you now know, but he was able to focus more of his time, not all of it, but more of his time in the area of what was called urban physical education, and providing advice and guidance to students interested in that area and that sort of thing. So the specialization thing began to have its effect inevitably. Fields can't remain stagnant unless they continue to pursue their field and investigate their field in an academic sort of way. The field doesn't advance. But that leads inevitably towards more and more specialization. And that's a challenge to keep those things balanced. I have got stories about that, but I won't go into that. When I came in '78, I took a look at and sort of examined the record of that time as to where was the major portion of our resources being invested. I had in my mind the idea that we needed to continue the process of being connected to the community, and in that process of being connected to the community, to be personally involved in the community in whatever ways we could find, because this was the primary resource for professionals in the field. To some extent that was true for teachers, but certainly other areas of the general exercise science and health area, this was the primary resource for people who wanted to do postgraduate study or who wanted to be engaged in professional development activities, conferences and the like. So in that first year, 78, 79, did this examination of our resources and how they were being invested, and it turned out, and this is totally understandable, it's not a criticism, it was a reality. A major portion of our resources were going into the support of what we called service courses, service course instruction for the entire student body. Every student in the university was required at that time to take 5 physical education activity classes and 1 health education class, for a total of 6. And that's where most of our resources were going, to support that. And if we had any hope of broadening the scope of what we do, we needed to find a way to balance that out in a more effective fashion. Well, as we were kind of stumbling along trying to find our way through that dilemma, the circumstances of life took care of it, because we had, and this is going to be totally new idea to you, I'm sure, but we had a budget crisis. And out of that budget crisis, it turned out the university was putting the pressure on us to find ways to be more, I guess I'd say more efficient in use of our resources. Mm-hmm. Out of that came a change, a rather major change in the requirement for the general student body. And we dropped the 5+1 requirement and replaced it with a 3-credit course called Health and Fitness for Life.
Wow, okay.
And that was in 1982, I think it started,
Right,
something
so
like that.
first, okay.
You know, that was a challenge for our faculty,
Right.
because people who had spent their careers being heavily involved in the delivery of the service program,
Right.
now were confronted with having to fit into a different model, at least for part of their work. So that was a real challenge, but it worked. We found our way through the maze and made it work, and that allowed us a little bit of freedom to begin to develop more in the professional scientific areas, if you will.
Right.
But that also cut down on student credit hours, didn't it?
It did. But we also lost some FTE in the process, which was the university motivation in the first place, was to pick up some resources in the midst of this budget crisis. But the faculty was great at that time. We all understood what we were faced with, and not everybody was, at the beginning, was equally of a mind to accommodate this shift, but there really wasn't an alternative. So we made the shift. People adjusted to it nicely and did their work effectively. And so that was in the 81 crisis.
And that's under Blumel, right?
Yes,
Yes.
correct.
Okay, right.
And then we had another one a little further down the line in the mid-'80s. I don't remember the exact year. And we came through that one in fairly good shape because we were pretty lean at that time in our resource base. But as this was happening, and before I came here, the first significant thrust into the community that got a lot of identity was the adult fitness program that Mike Tishy ran. And it attracted a lot of people from the community for an evening, a late afternoon, early evening fitness experience. That got a lot of recognition in the medical community and in other places. So that was kind of the opening shot, if you will,
Right.
and that happened before I came here. But we were able to capitalize on that, and out of that, Mike and I developed or created the idea of a conference on fitness in business, which we ran for all the years after that, for 13 years. We did that annually, and that got a lot of interest and support and participation by professionals in the community who are not teachers. We had stuff going on for teachers, there's no question about that. But to broaden our base, this was one of the ways that happened, and we got a lot of participation by people in the medical field and in the fitness industry.
Right.
Because Chuck can speak to this by his own experience, but in the early 80s, the fitness industry was starting to explode.
Right.
And that's not a school-based program. That's in the community and in industry and in other government agencies and the like. So the Fitness and Business Conference fit that model rather well. And along the way, we were able, as retirements came along, we were able to employ some people to fit this changing model as we moved ahead. Then we had, this was through Mike Tishy's contacts, but we developed a special program with the Oregon Board of Police Standards and Training. That title has changed a bit now, I understand, but we conducted a special program for them for 6 or 7 years. And what it amounted to is the police and law enforcement agencies would send people to this special program, this special course, and out of that they would be identified as fitness specialists in their department, in their police department or sheriff's department or whatever, to provide programming for fitness development for people in those occupations. And that got some publicity and got some recognition for the university and certainly for our school. And there are other examples along the way. There was a special conference that I didn't have anything really to do with, but it was a special program for elementary PE teachers. You remember that?
Yes.
Don Zierung was heavily involved in that. And they made that an annual event, and really the teachers themselves carried that event. They got cooperation from people on our staff who needed to help, but it was basically carried by them. But it was another way of reaching into the community for the school. In the fall of 1979, after Howard Westcott retired, we were able to hire two faculty members. One of them was Leslie McBride, who's still on the faculty here, in community health. And that goes back to Alice's point about the development of that specialization. Leslie added a level of expertise to that was important. The other person we hired was Lorne Robertson, who left here when the school was dissolved. Lorne was a wonderful guy. He was a Scotsman, and he had a beautiful Scottish touch to his speech. He was a weight thrower. That doesn't mean just shot put and discus. That means the cumber or whatever they call it that the Scots throw. Anyway, he was a big, strong guy, but he came to us as a specialist in the areas of kinesiotherapy, and biomechanics. Okay. And he developed a laboratory and a clinic in our facility that was serving people from the community who needed rehabilitation or whatever from an injury or some other problem, accident. And that got a lot of recognition and tied us with the American Corrective Therapy Association. It later became the American Kinesiotherapy Association. And Lorne was a very effective teacher and leader in that program. And then he developed, as a part of that program to lead to certification, in kinesiotherapy, national certification. He developed a working relationship and a partnership with the VA hospital up on the hill, which was a beautiful thing. And then later he developed a working relationship with Nike in their sports lab, so that students from our program that he was leading would have an internship opportunity at Nike working in their sports lab. And I'm sure there are some other examples, but I don't want to go on and on here. But these are all examples of the way the school progressed from the very beginning that Chuck talked about, and all the barriers that they overcame. And then when I came here, it was kind of ready. It was a time when there was a readiness to begin to move into some of these other areas that gave us an identity. And there was nothing wrong with the identity of being a teacher preparation unit, because at the time that took place, the need was critical. You made reference to it, Chuck, about the demand for teachers. And people have stories to tell about starting to teach with 1 year of college, or 2 years of college, on an emergency credential. I'm referring now to my experience in California, but that time had passed. The great unfilled demand no longer existed in terms of needing to put all of our resources into teacher preparation. So these other areas gave us a connection in the community, and it gave us an expanded model that attracted students who would not otherwise have come to us because they were not interested or not motivated to be teachers, but they were interested in these other possibilities. Then in 1988, I went on a sabbatical leave, and I was told after it was approved that that's never done. Deans don't take sabbaticals. But I don't know what happened, but I made the application, and at that time Nate Cicero was the president, and he approved it. So I took 4 months and went to Japan, and then went to the Western states, looking at programs, trying to gather ideas for what we could implement here, or what we could do to strengthen what we were doing here. One of the things that came out of that was the idea that we needed a person who really was a specialist in motor development for children. And that's when we hired a young man by the name of John Osmond. And we hired him in the spring of 1990. In the fall of 1990, at the November election, the population of the state adopted a property tax limitation. And built into that property tax limitation was a shift of support for the public schools to the state from the local property tax base. Well, that had its domino effect in the state budget, which ended up in a major hit for all of the state agencies, but especially in higher education. So that happened in early November, and immediately the discussion started, what is this going to mean? What's this going to look like? And so I went to my regular meeting with the provost on a day in early January. And he was an interim provost. I don't know if any of you would remember him, but his name was Bob Frank. And he was here because Frank Martino left as the provost in the fall, and they were in the search stage. And so Bob Frank was appointed as an interim. He was from Oregon State, had done this kind of thing before on an interim basis. Anyway, I walked into his office, and we exchanged pleasantries for a little bit. And then he didn't beat around the bush. He just said, I'm really sorry to be the one to have to tell you this. But he said the implications of the budget reduction for this institution is such that it's of such a major nature that it looks like we're going to have to eliminate your school. And I said, what? And so we pursued that a little bit. And I told him, I said, please don't make this announcement to anybody else until I have a chance to discuss this with our faculty, and then after the faculty with our students, with the students who are majoring in our program. So he agreed that that was the right course of action. From that point on, there was never any question in my mind that that decision had already been made.
And what do you think the basis for that decision was? Why was the school targeted?
Two or three reasons, I think, and maybe Chuck and Alice was already retired by then. She didn't have to run I'll just try toss out a couple or two or three that I think were at work. One is that I was told later by a very reliable source that the chancellor at the time, and he was one of your Salem classmates or in your school, what was his name? Do you remember? Anyway, he came to the state system from, I think, from University of Alabama, Birmingham, where he was a top administrator. Anyway, it was reported that by what I consider a very reliable source, that he made the statement to the state board and to the presidents that it was time to make the public understand that these kinds of major changes in the budget and in support for higher education had serious implications. And his point was that if we just do this by having everybody reduce their budgets by 5% across the board, and we get by, they will still believe, oh, it was just gravy, it was just excess, they didn't need it anyway. So he said, when this is over, and this is the expression that he used, I was told, there needs to be blood on the table. Which to me meant there need to be significant cuts in order for this to be understood for how serious this is. That's one thing.
Right.
I think that I'm not sure the administration of the university at that time was particularly interested or concerned. Maybe that's interested is not a good word. Probably not too concerned about our school. And the reason I say that is I'm not sure they had identified it yet as a significant part of the urban-based universities model. And as a result, if you look at the makeup of the university at that time, you had a school of social work that was the only school of social work in the state.
Right.
You had a school of urban and public affairs at that time, which had the same characteristic. You had a school of fine and performing arts.
Right.
And how can you have an urban-based university and communicate and interact with the community and not have a school of fine and performing arts that supports the arts community? You can't have a university without a college of arts and sciences.
Right.
You've got a college of engineering that's important in this metropolitan area. Let's see, what is it that's so important about the School of Health and Physical Education?
Right.
There's one of those in Corvallis. There's one of those in Eugene.
I remember that argument.
Yeah. So, I can understand how they worked their way through that process. I think that, and I neglected School of Education, but the same thing applies.
Well, when you think about it too, nationally, the demand for teaching teachers, like elementary teachers and physical ed, had kind of gone by the wayside.
Yeah, it's true.
And so there wasn't as much demand for training. So that's lower student credit hours for the school.
Yeah, it's true.
When I went to school here as undergraduate, I took the methods classes in health and PE. You cut the service classes too. That was another lowering of student credit hours.
Yeah.
So my experience anyway is that student credit hours drives programs. And I'm assuming was reflected somewhat in what was happening with your school.
Well, we had gone from, and I don't remember the exact level, Alice, you may. When I came here, I think we had 26 and a fraction FTE or 27 and a fraction, I can't remember which. But a lot of the majority of that was going into the service program. Well, when we made that shift, before that we had reduced by 1 or 2 FTE And after we made that shift, I think we dropped to something like 18 FTE. So inevitably, when you reduce FTE that much, you're going to have reduction in student credit hour production.
Right.
So, but that's an important point. When you start to look at the whole scene, that's a factor that has to be considered.
What was the relationship of the school to OHSU?
I'm
Or
glad
did
you
they have
asked.
Oh, okay.
I engaged in about, I think must have been 6 years or 7 maybe, of conversations. First, it began with the dean of the medical school. And then it eventually got to the head of physical therapy in the OHSU hospital. And it was intended to lead to a joint program between OHSU and PSU in physical therapy. We couldn't pull it off with our own resources, and they couldn't pull it off with their own resources because they needed some specializations that neither one had. So we engaged in that for that number of years, and I think we were getting close. The head of physical therapy at the hospital was really enthusiastically behind this. She had the Oregon State Physical Therapy Association on board. The reason for them being on board was that there was a real shortage of physical therapists in the state. And there was only one program in the state, and that was at Pacific University, which is a private institution and extremely expensive. So there were good reasons to expand the opportunities in that area. Furthermore, the Bureau of Labor Statistics at that time, in forecasting labor needs, one of the two leading areas that needed to be addressed was physical therapists. So we had a lot of ammunition for making that happen, but we couldn't do it alone, and it required these ongoing conversations to try to find ways to make that happen. Well, then when the school got dropped, it was immediately off the table. One other thing that connected us with OHSU, we had a faculty member who was transferred in the mid-'80s in a budget issue, transferred to us from the College of Arts and Sciences, specifically from the chemistry department, but no, I'm sorry, that's not true. He was in a two-person unit in environmental health. And his specialty was in the science portion of environmental health. His name was David Donnett. And he got transferred to us, to our health education department. He never felt like he fit real well because he didn't see himself as a health educator. He saw himself as a scientist, interested in environmental issues. But he tolerated it quite well. He came to me one day and he said, we have to find a way to connect with the environmental health people in this metropolitan area. So I encouraged him to put his ideas on paper, because he'd been talking with people in the environmental health community in the city and beyond, and what the needs were and how to meet those needs. And before I left Toledo, we had adopted or developed a program of a Master of Science in Public Health. And so I said, maybe that's the connection, because if we do the MSPH, then you'll have a strong science base, which is what he was interested in promoting. So we started down that path, and before it came to, and he started talking to people at OHSU then about this as a program that made sense to combine resources. That then led to, in short, it led over a period of 2 or 3 years to a joint group being formed, because when people in Eugene and Corvallis found out what we were doing, they complained to the state board, and so they asked for a task force to be put together with representation from all 4 institutions, the Eugene, Corvallis, Portland, and OHSU. And so we did that. We met for quite an extended period of time regularly in Salem as kind of a central point, and hammered out an agreement, but by then the focus had shifted from an MSPH to an MPH, which made sense.
Right.
It was a natural evolution in this process. And we had come to the point of actually having a draft program in review amongst that task force. And the greatest amount of foot dragging came in Eugene. But they finally came around to agree. And so they backed out of being involved in that. But Oregon State stayed in, and OHSU and PSU. And it was about at that point where 1990 came, 91 early school was eliminated. And so that thing, so far as my role in it was concerned, and Leslie McBride was the faculty member who was participating in those discussions, that ended my role.
Right.
But because the health department, health education department was transferred to the School of Urban and Public Affairs, it continued to exist and to have an opportunity to grow. So NOHAD was interested in seeing that happen.
Right.
So he picked up on it, and before too long, they actually had an MPH agreement, a degree agreement.
Right.
But anyway, then you ask about OHSU,
That's
you
so
learn a whole lot
interesting.
more than you ever wanted.
No, I think that's, well, in the light of how things continue to develop, it's just it's very interesting to hear how those relationships started.
Yeah, I'd like to get us back again to 1992, just for a minute. That was when Judith Ramaley was president, when this decision was made to close the school. And as a faculty member here then, and having a background in physical education, son myself, and advocate in that area, I was mortified when I heard about it as a faculty. And so I always wondered, knowing the importance of health and physical health and fitness as a life need, how an emerging university administratively could consider eliminating a very important area of preparation for anybody going here. And so I always wondered, well, did anybody come to the rescue at all? I mean, what happened? Was there a community movement at all to try to save this school? Did the faculty senate meet? Was this considered? It seemed like, as a person in another school then, that I wasn't seeing anything happening. So I never knew if there had been some real efforts made to combat that administrative decision.
Steve, the school got, but it was channeled through me. It wasn't because of me, it was because of the school. The school got a lot of individual responses of support from the medical community, from the campus. I got letters directed to us in support of what we were and what we were doing from other academic units on the campus. But they were individual responses, and nothing ever coalesced to bring that any further heat, if you will, or pressure on the decision. I should have said to you that I can't remember now when it was, because the announcement to me was made in early January, and I think, and then we had a meeting with the committee, the ad hoc task force that worked their way through the decision process to make a recommendation to the president. And we had a meeting with that group, several faculty members I recruited to put together a presentation of who they are and what they do, and what they do collaboratively, not only within our faculty, but with other entities outside the university. And they did a beautiful job. And I think I said to you earlier that one of the people came to me after that meeting and said, wow, I learned a lot, and there's a lot of things about your school I never knew. So in a sense, that falls back on me. I didn't find ways to communicate as effectively, apparently, as necessary to reach people with that message. But anyway, we left that meeting, and shortly after that, I got an invitation to come to the state board meeting in where were they meeting? It doesn't make any difference. Monmouth, I think it was in Monmouth. And to make a presentation to the board before they signed off on this recommendation about eliminating the school. So I got some people, and tactically, I chose to invite people who were supporters of the school who are not university related. I figured the board is going to anticipate that anything that a faculty member says in our support is going to be beautiful. They're going to protect their job. That's a given. But I thought if I brought some people who had recognized expertise from the metropolitan area, and they would say why this is important. One was a public school teacher, PE specialist. One was an MD, and one was the director of a fitness program in an industrial. Actually, that's not true. It was in a hospital situation, but an employee-based fitness program. So they did a wonderful job. They went down, made their presentation, and all I had to do was introduce them and tell a little bit about who each of them was and why they were there, and they carried the ball. And when it was over, we thanked them for listening, and we left. The next day, in a report about that meeting, a news report in the radio was where it was. I don't know if there's anything about it on TV news or not. Anyway, the radio report was that the board, some member of the board, maybe it was a member of the board, said that they had learned a lot, specifically about this school, that they were impressed by it, but what could they do? So, that was a formality, and I appreciated it, that they were willing to hear the story and the message. But I think by that time it was such it was so far down the path that they really couldn't reverse that. There's no way they could have reversed it. Anyway.
Chuck, what year did you retire? Were you still here, or?
92.
92, so. Right, so when this news came out for you longtime faculty members within the school, what was the reaction?
I got
know
a
you
telephone
retired,
call at home, and I don't even remember who it was, but I probably Bob Scruggs or somebody, and he called and he said, guess what? They just closed the School of Health and PE. And I sat there and I said, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. It was just beyond belief.
I think we were all dumbfounded because of the fact that the school had reached out into the community in so many aspects and was delivering a valuable service to a good cross-section of this community. And I think that Jack hit the button on the head. The decision was made. It had gone too far, and no one was about ready to reverse it because it would have indicated to them incompetence maybe in this area making this decision. So I think that there were other alternatives that could have taken place, but those alternatives were not studied, and so they really weren't aware of what the alternatives were to it. I was kind of dumbfounded, and I was, I had the opportunity to talk to Dr. Talon, and he said, Chuck, I'm glad to have you come over to the School of Urban and Public Affairs in our community health, and I had been quite involved in our community in various ways, and he saw that as a plus for me and for the school, because I was in contact with the broader community. And I kind of thought to myself, let's see, how old am I now? What is this? And I said, I think that maybe now is a good time to make the clean cut. And so I made a clean cut. This is a great opportunity for me to come back and reminisce a little bit and have contact with the university. But I made a clean cut, and I took other avenues. And so it wasn't the end of my life for me. I mean,
that's an important point. I remember telling numerous people, Chuck, that once you turn that corner, don't look back.
Yeah.
Because all you'll do is live in regret. I felt bad, personally, because I was here and a part of this, and I knew what the potential was and down the road. But the ones I felt most sorrowful for, if you will, were people like Alice and Chuck, who invested their whole lives, their whole careers here. And to see it terminated that way was really hard, really hard.
Well, you had quite a group of people that even today get together once in a while.
Oh, thanks.
And I wanted to say that
Our school has not died. Jack has gotten us to do a bulletin board or a display in a lower level of what was the HPE building that is now the Stott Center. And we've put up 4 different displays, starting with the school beginning and the kinds of things that were being done at that time, and then worked through to the up until the school was closed. We've had these displays, and people who go to the basketball games there and the students all get to look at those, and Maxine was instrumental in getting us an award from the Retired Faculties Association for the work that we did there. And so the school lives on.
And Jack, every term, we used to have luncheon for
Well,
help.
we did for quite a while. Now it's boiled down to 2 events a year.
But still, how many years has that been?
22 this summer.
Yeah,
We still get together.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good. Steve, what time? I didn't wear my watch.
it's 22.
22. 22.
1.
Wow. Been going on. That's great, though. It doesn't feel that long to me at all. So time has a significant chunk of time has passed, and you've all moved on to other things. Now that you've had some time to reflect, right? I mean, we get 20/20 hindsight, and when you describe some of the directions the school was going to, I think from someone at this point in time looking, it looked like there's so much. I mean, it's hard not to kind of get caught up in, wow, there was so much potential. You seemed right on target with a lot of places we want to be now. So in some ways it seems like the school was very forward thinking, or still maintain that vision. And some of those things have come to. So the school as the entity and was not able to see those come through in that way. But when you look back now and kind of, what do you see as the major accomplishments that you are proud of, both personally and with your involvement in the school, and also out of those programs and things that you helped get started and kind of helped get that vision going? I would love to hear that from each of you, just in reflection.
Here's the
Old timer starts.
Yeah.
What I think that we contributed a great deal to this community, and I think that we made an awareness of who we are to the larger community, and that it added to the perception of what a university had to offer and the role of a university in an urban setting. And I think that was great. Personally, when I look at my individual successes, it provided me an opportunity to go to college. I mean, this would not have, I would not have gone to college had it not been for Portland State. I would not. I probably would have ended up as a mechanical engineer, because that's what my dad wanted me to be. In fact, he wanted me to go to OTI one term so I could learn about diesel engines, and I wasn't interested in that. And so it provided me that opportunity to come here and pursue a goal of mine, because I had some in Portland Public Schools, I had some great teachers in the area of physical education, and I was impressed with them, and I think that they set a mind frame in my mind is that I can make a difference in an individual's life by pointing out to them and giving them the skills to maintain a level of wellness and fitness that would contribute to their achieving another goal or another end, whether it's an engineer, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a scientist or something like that, but that I could have a role in contributing to that foundation that they were developing and that they could build upon. So I think that was one of the great things. I think the other thing is that coming to Portland State, I had the opportunity, as many have, is to continue my education. And so Portland State provided me with sabbatical leave, and of course I had to take some initiative before that in order to become eligible and accepted for a doctoral program. But I felt that I would have had that opportunity, and going back and doing additional work at the doctoral level provided me with a whole new skill level, you might say, and a knowledge level, so that I could come back here and do what I considered to be a better job. So I think I'm a better person myself for the opportunity that Portland State provided for me.
Did you have any ongoing relationships with your students, or do you keep track of where your students went on? I have students that we meet. In fact, one of our students, we meet every month, and we have dinner, and we meet with a family and talk with family. And so, yeah, I've developed some relationships with former students, and I think that we all have done that, because that was the kind of the atmosphere that we instituted in the School of Health and PE. That individual relationships are very important, and working together is a key to success in any society. That's wonderful. What about you, Alice?
I'm just so proud of our graduates. I was in charge of undergraduate advising, and so I met with all of the students when they first came in, and evaluated a lot of transcripts and got them started, and then assigned them to a regular advisor, and then I had a lot of them in classes. And they're reaching the end of their careers now, unfortunately. But we have had so many successful people out in the public schools. Coaches, you read about, they're winning this and they're winning that. We have principals. I can't tell you how many principals we've had in the metropolitan area. And we even have one superintendent who's still serving in the community. And that speaks well for our program and our faculty and the programs that they came through. Yeah, really great.
I think the expanding vision is something I'm really, when I think about it, when I reflect on it, I think that's something I really value. That in the early years when I wasn't a part of this at all, there was this sense of vision, there was this idea that this is going somewhere, it's not just a static operation, and people committed themselves to seeing that happen. Then the vision was expanded again when the facility was developed. It gave some new opportunities, created some new horizons. And when I came here, I think there was a readiness to take another step forward together. And I should have emphasized this more. I think one of the key things about our faculty was that there was a very real sense of doing this together. It wasn't isolated pieces. But that expanding vision, I could see over the few years I was here, in the willingness to take on some new ideas, to develop some new program emphases, to get involved in new ways in the community, both the community at large and other institutions in the community. That is something I look at and recognize that we were on a journey. We just had our journey. We ran into a roadblock and couldn't continue it. But what happened on the journey up to that point isn't gone.
Right.
That's why I appreciated the challenge that Steve has offered us over the last several years to do this history project. Because when this group is gone, and I guess I'm part of that, and that will happen one of these days, then the connection or the linkage with that history will be gone. And so what has happened already in terms of today and the visual displays we've done, and now all of this material being in the archives is really critically important in terms of us feeling like there is something there that represents the investment of these lives in this institution. And that's, I think, very worthwhile. So thanks, Steve.
I think you should know, too, that Chris Paschild is working with RAPS on a special website where we might put PSU's history on that website.
Yeah. I mean, that's the goal, is to make it as broadly available.
It's not going to be necessarily just sitting someplace and not being viewed, in other words.
Yeah.
So this particular instance here today could be on that website, etc. And so that people wanting to learn about this university might have a chance quite easily in the future to read it online or hear it online.
It just occurred to me that I would be remiss if I didn't comment about and express appreciation for and to, through something like you just described, all the people who served this university in classified staff positions. Right. People who worked, we had a lot of classified staff involvement because we had the locker rooms and we had the gym suit service, laundry service, and all of that. Those people provided an absolutely essential resource to keep things moving. And they so often served behind the scenes, never given any particular recognition except when they got their 20-year pin or whatever it was, which was important in itself. But I just think that they get lost in the shuffle too often. And I wanted to just say my own personal thanks to those people who supported us in all those years.
That's for sure.
We know that Stott Center is might have a new pavilion, right?
I don't know.
Okay.
Possibly.
It appears like that might be coming in the near future. And it seems to me that somebody ought to be able to walk into that new pavilion and see something very clear what this used to be.
Right.
Working for health and human performance.
Yeah, what helped it get there?
I think that should be a goal.
Yeah.
Well, that would be wonderful if it did, because when we're gone, that will be the link. That kind of public opportunity, and the webpage thing that you're talking about also. Those are important linkages for us to whatever is ahead for this institution.
Well, I have to say thank you so much to all of you, but especially for you and Maxine too. But you could have taken a very different attitude about this, and everyone would have understood if you had. And I think I met Jack my first year here, and you took the initiative to come in and give me materials that you had held on to, and then to write up a brief history and to make that contact with the University Archives, and then the project that Alice worked on with you and with Sylvia, and getting that into Stott. I mean, I think that speaks to a real generosity of spirit and a real commitment to this institution that you all have been willing to do that. And
Chris,
this wouldn't be happening. I mean, so I'm totally grateful, because that's the survival of the history. And it's I always think it's important because we call it history, but it's not in the past. I mean, that is a continuation, just as the school's not here, but we see the foundations that your school and you all built and what those are becoming. And, you know, we need to realize that it's all part of the the future. And if you don't take action and do that yourselves, it can't happen. And so I appreciate that so much that you've been willing to do that.
I can't speak for these two, but for me, I want to tell you I really appreciate your investment in us and in our school. Your addition to the university faculty and to the operation of the archives, I can't tell you how important that was in my mind for that addition to have been made here to give an opportunity for the future to remember the past.
Right.
That
Absolutely.
is a round of applause.
We have the best jobs in the world. We love our jobs. We're the luckiest people on campus, I think, sometimes. So thank you. I hope we covered everything that you wanted to cover, and if not, we'll get you back in here. Yeah, and many thanks to Maxine for coming in, even with your knee giving you a problem, and helping us, and for Steve for all the organizing that he does to make these happen. So
Steve, I already commented about, but if Steve hadn't taken the initiative he took, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Right.
no, it's
And
true.
Maxine has been a supporter of our school forever,
Yeah,
almost forever.
That's right.
yeah. So that's
Thank
wonderful.
So thank you very much.
Oh, thank
Yes,
you all.
thank
Yay!
you.
Thank you.